thanks again for having me. This is something that I really enjoy doing, so you've put me in a place of being pretty psyched to be here this morning. So the last time you saw me last spring, I was in a similar position to where you all were, where I was chairing a department, and then I have recently this summer changed jobs, and now I'm actually kind of working with conflict all the time, so this is pretty fun. But I'll give you a quick overview of sort of the areas of my position, because it might actually be relevant to some of the things that we're talking about today. I know many of you have already gone through this multiple times. If you haven't, you will have the opportunity to go through the Title IX training that Lolo Hong does for department chairs every year. One of the jobs that I have this year is serving as her senior deputy Title IX coordinator and DHR administrator for employees. So whenever there is a concern that comes up with employees of discrimination, harassment, retaliation, or a Title IX issue with sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, then actually I'm the person that ends up managing those cases. And so I've been working closely with Lolo and with the rest of the team. I also work with students that deal with this kind of thing. The other part of my job, which actually I think is maybe even more relevant to this kind of discussion, is that I've been appointed as the employee ombudsperson. And we haven't had one of those before. We've had lots of people that have sort of helped with resolving conflicts in a lot of different ways. Some of you may have approached folks in human resources or faculty affairs to help with different kinds of conflict resolution. But at San Francisco State, we haven't had an employee ombudsperson. And an ombudsperson is a confidential consultant for conflict resolution. And I say that because I know that when you get the Title IX training, you're told, oh, we can't keep this stuff confidential. It has to potentially go up the chain. But if you come see an employee ombudsperson, it's confidential unless you give me permission to bring it out. Or unless I think somebody is going to become physically harmed because of the situation, in which case I would feel an obligation to convince you to be more open about it too. But those are consultations that are available to everybody. It doesn't have to be discrimination related. It doesn't have to be related to a particular kind of relationship. It can be conflicts with students, administrators, staff, other faculty. But either way, it's a position where I get to hang out with people and give consultations and talk through situations. Sometimes I'll help out with that, sometimes I'll mediate a conflict, sometimes I'll facilitate, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll just do sort of a one-way coaching to try to help somebody with their own approach to it. But that's a part that I've been having a lot of fun kind of figuring out, being the first ombudsperson for employees on this campus, how that kind of thing goes here. So if any of you at some point feel like you want to reach out, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm really happy to be here, and I know some of you were here last spring, and not all of you were here last spring, but the first thing I wanted to do was sort of give this shout out to some of the things that we talked about last time. And we're not going to go over them in depth again, but there are things that you might want to sort of think, oh yeah, I remember our discussion about that. We talked about sort of approaching situations, and this was in a very sort of broad category of every kind of conflict you could think of as a chair. But imagining success and using sort of appreciative ways of going into any kind of conflict situation, trying to really have that positive slant to the communication that you use. We also talked about the importance of, when you're in a conflict, focusing on the needs or the interests that everybody in the conflict has, instead of focusing on the positions. So, I need to teach these 3 classes at these 3 times is different from, I have kids in school, and so that's why I need to teach at these 3 times, and these are the classes that are in my expertise. Are there creative ways that we can meet that in some other way? We also talked about sort of how to solicit solution, and this was sort of in particular in faculty meetings, that idea of kind of going back to appreciative facilitation, but also what kinds of questions can you ask to really get people to think about solving for these interests that we all want to make sure that people have. And then also there was a very brief discussion, and this is something that I sort of keep going forward, and there's going to be a little I think shout out to it today, but this idea of being sort of in the service of validation. And it's something that comes up for me even more often this year than it has in the past. But folks on our campus work really hard, and they don't often get validated for the work that they do. And so the more that as leaders in your departments and in schools, you can validate what people are doing, even if you really hate what they're doing over here. If there's something that you can find that is really worthwhile and validate them for it, it does make a difference, and it makes people more willing to work with you on resolving conflict in the future. And so that's more of a kind of priming the pump for making sure that we have these productive conversations as things go on. Any questions? Or some of that probably sounds familiar. Some of you are like, whoa, I was sleeping during that time. That's okay. And so in relation to the kind of situations and scenarios that I received and sort of the idea of what kinds of things you all are interested in focusing on today, I am going to think about things in 3 different areas. And I'm going to focus on sort of the emotional side of conflict and addressing some of the emotions that come in and how we can think about emotions that come into conflict. I'm going to talk a little bit about power and how power can create different sorts of situations for conflict. How do we address power? How do we enact power? And I think for department chairs, that is like one of the most difficult situations when you're a peer faculty member and a department chair at the same time. It's really, really difficult to manage that. And the final thing that I'll talk about are sort of communication skills that go around with those things. And we're going to do some activities in between all of that. So some of this is going to actually sound, I think, really familiar to you, depending upon what discipline you're from. But there are a few things that I would like to make really clear about conflict, and that is that there isn't a single conflict ever that does not have emotion involved in it somewhere. People can come to the table and sound really reasonable and sound like they don't have any kind of emotions behind it, but that's just not the case. We're motivated by emotions, and so there's always something there. Conflict is almost always emotionally defined, and it doesn't mean that we have to be crying or screaming or having those sorts of what we call emotional floods happening during our conflict, but it's there, and being able to recognize it is important. It reveals what we value, it reveals those interests, those things that are important to us. It really focuses on identity issues, and I think for a lot of us, we're going to find that identity issues are at the heart of some of these conflicts, and how do we get to addressing identity issues and valuing everybody's identity issues, and how does emotion help reveal what the power relationships are? So I don't know how often you've had somebody say that they feel unsafe in a situation or unsafe in a relationship. And if you kind of, there's not a physical threat here, and somebody hasn't said anything particular that makes me think that, you're in threat, so why do you feel, well, there are lots of reasons why people feel unsafe, and a lot of that has to do with those sort of power relationships and their emotional reaction to the power relationships. So we'll talk about sort of 3 different ways to kind of think through what are the emotions that might happen in conflicts, how to identify those different emotions, and focus on sort of the cognitive appraisals, the different physiological impacts that happen. And so that thing like emotional flooding, I don't know if any of you have people coming to your office and crying. It was something that happened to me so much more often than I thought, I'm making people cry all the time. And, but actually it said, no, people are coming to you because they have issues that are really important to them. And so there are physiological impacts and expression impacts that come from dealing with those sorts of emotions. And so in this first area, and I have kids, and so I don't know if any of you have seen this really adorable movie that has its challenges, but there are some fun parts to it. But one of the things that I like about sort of that pictorial description is that it really kind of gets into this idea that emotions actually are reasonable. They're completely reasonable. You might be thinking that somebody is emotional and therefore not reasonable. But first of all, I would argue with you about that. I think somebody can be perfectly reasonable when they're emotional. But also, they're having that emotion for a reason. And if you can identify what that reason is, why they're having the emotion, you are in so much better of a place to help address what's going on between the 2 of you, or what's going on between the 2 of them, or the 5 of them, or the 25 of them. So that's really helpful. And so there are 2 different sorts of appraisals that people might make. And one, the appraisal is, here I am in this situation. I'm appraising this situation, and I'm feeling an emotion promotion because of how I have evaluated the situation. And this is sort of a cognitive psychology sort of approach, and we'll talk about another couple of approaches as well, but just thinking that this might be related to how I'm appraising the situation is helpful for kind of helping people change the appraisal later. So if I'm approaching a situation, my primary cognitive appraisal is going to be related to these kinds of things here. So how important is this for the goals that I have? How relevant is it for the goals that I have? And how much does this have to do with my identity or my ego involvement? And so you might think about a situation in which somebody, let's say a tenure track professor has decided to go up for tenure and promotion. In that situation, those are very important goals for them. If there's some kind of suggestion that they won't achieve tenure or promotion because of a certain situation, then that's really relevant. It really fits in with what they're dealing with at the moment, and that's a huge identity involvement for them. And so it makes a lot of sense that there's going to be an appraisal that is a threatening situation, and probably fear will be the emotion that they feel because of that. And so being able to say, oh, okay, that's what's going on in that situation, this is probably what they're feeling, even if what they are doing sounds like they're angry, it's probably coming from that emotional place of fear. And so that's one way to kind of think through what's that primary appraisal that people might be making. There are also secondary appraisals that people are making when they're in a situation and having emotions about it. And the secondary appraisals are where we can kind of help them think through how to potentially change that. So the first is, what kind of accountability do they or does somebody else have in that situation? So if an RTP member has questioned the relevancy of several publications that are in a list, is it that RTP member's sort of fault that that's happening? Are they accountable for that? Or is that related to the department criteria? Or is that related to another kind of discussion that happened in the committee? So how important is it essentially for you to blame a person or a situation in this kind of in whatever conflict you're in? How well are you able to cope with this? And this is a case-by-case kind of thing. And it's not something that I can say, oh, I'll go around the room and tell each of you how ready you are to cope with situations. That's, partially what else is going on in your life, and, how generally do you respond to challenging situations, but being able to help somebody identify what's your coping potential and what do you need to have support in this area to cope with an upsetting situation. And also, is it possible that this could change? Is this it? Are you going to lash out because there's just no other solution here? Or can we think through what are the other opportunities or possibilities that might happen in the future? So for the cognitive appraisal that people are making, they're thinking about all of these things. I might say, yeah, I'm going to blame that person. They're the first person that ever brought anything up about these publications that I think are amazing. And I don't have the coping potential right now because I've got all this other stuff going on in my life, and tenure and promotion was a really stressful process. And that's not going to change. If I don't get tenure and promotion, I'm out. So maybe that's where I am in those secondary appraisals. Somebody kind of helping with the conflict might be able to help bring around a different sort of idea about what's going on with those secondary appraisals. So this is something that I said before too. It can be used, emotion can be used, or your identification of emotion can be used as an analytic tool. So this is both relevant for when you are involved in the conflict and when you're helping others who are involved in the conflict. And it's also predictable and reasonable. So if you can get to a place where you're looking at what is happening with emotion, and you can predict it, and you can think through why somebody might be feeling that emotion, then you'll get to a place where you're able to help resolve that conflict potentially a little bit better than you were before, and think of different strategies. And so this is an opportunity, after kind of going through some of these ideas about emotion. Some of this might be really familiar to you, and others might not be, where I want you to take this. It's the first thing that you have here is this analyzing emotion case study. And what I've done is to put together a really general list of questions in an activity. And my hope is that with one or two other people, depending upon sort of who's at your table and who's accessible, I want to encourage you to pick one of these scenarios and as a group sort of talk through how can you answer the questions about the emotions that folks might be feeling in these situations and what the appraisals they might be making are, and are there ways that you might think about helping them reappraise those situations. So the scenario, and if you really would like to bring your own scenario that you didn't have a chance to submit to Mickey at the time, I'll encourage you to do that too. You're welcome to do that. But some of these scenarios are really quite wonderful for this sort of thing. So do you have faculty who are refusing to do committee work? Do you have people complaining about their office mates? Do you have curriculum that they're having a really hard time getting people to teach? In all of those situations, what are people feeling? Why are they feeling that? And how can you help people sort of work through those different appraisals? Does that make sense? Okay. And do you feel comfortable finding people around you, or should I have you count off? All right, awesome. All right, well, let's do that for a little bit. I'm going to come around and eavesdrop, and then I want to talk about it. So it's likely that everybody did not get through all of the questions, in which case, no worries. If you didn't get through all the questions, that's no problem. But I was really interested to know that there's a couple of groups that use the same scenario that I think came at it from slightly different perspectives. And then there were two other, at least, different scenarios. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what everybody came up with in terms of identifying emotions and whether or not that was helpful in thinking through the particular conflict. So I'll put it out there. Would any group like to talk about sort of what they came up with, what their perception is of the scenario, and whether or not it was helpful, or not whether or not, how it was helpful to, let's positively frame that, go through some of the questions. Anybody want to jump in?
We can jump in.
Okay.
I'll volunteer our group here. So we looked at scenario number 6, where students come and complain about a professor or a lecturer, and and they're saying that they're stressed out because they're not getting anything from class, etc. I think a lot of us have dealt with that kind of a situation. And for me, it was helpful to identify the students' emotions. I think even though I am a counselor and I do some of that, still, as a professor, I think I'm biased towards the professor perspective, and I don't think I've been paying enough attention to the student perspective. And so this exercise was helpful in making me think about, what's going on with the students? What are their goals? Some of the things that you had talked about earlier. Why are they stressed out? Why are they anxious about what's going on in the classroom, etc. And I think that by identifying their emotions, I think then, we'll be able to work on, next steps or what's going to work out better.
You feel that gave you some tools to actually help them out instead of maybe just trying to assess the situation, or?
Right,
yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah, by trying to understand the emotions that the students are going through, I think that's going to be a key piece to finding a solution.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, there looked like there was maybe something. Did you want to add?
Well, I think the emotions that we were thinking of was some would be anger, around like
that the students would be feeling, yeah.
Yeah, that they may not be getting what they needed from the class, and then but when we identify is really that they had a fear behind it, and the fear was that they would fail because they weren't getting what they needed. And so that was, so identifying with the fear of failing or fear of not being able to graduate as a result of not doing well in the class because the class is disorganized or they're having trouble getting what they need.
I'm trying to figure out, wait a minute, what goal do I think can't be met because of this situation really helps you identify what that fear is, or what the emotion is. Absolutely. That's a good perspective, yeah.
We can use it also empower the students, to help the situation, not just about complaining about the lecture per se, but really help their learning experiences in the classroom, so we can be more productive.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you.
Frustration too. And then students extremely frustrated.
Potentially, yeah. For some of them, so there could be anger, there could be fear, there could also be that sort of sense of justice.
Yeah.
And so you can ask questions to try to get at what is the thing that's important to students, and that's another one too. It's not okay for this to be like this, and this other class isn't like it. So there's a little there too. And then you all approach the same scenario, but I think from a different place.
Yeah, I mean, we went so many different places with this because we kept kind of checking our assumptions and where we were going. In fact, at some point we were trying to think about how to resolve it before we jumped from assessing the emotion to going to the next step. And then we kind of caught ourselves and said, wait, we're supposed to be doing it this other way. So we kept sort of checking ourselves and our assumptions, but there were a couple things that happened. One was that we did the opposite of what you were saying, Sarah, and we were thinking about what's going on for the lecture, and then we started to go down this road of how do we need to better support lecturers, and what might that lecturer need, and then we backed off from that and said, whoa, okay, wait. But the other thing we thought was the importance of assessing the emotion is maybe the students came because they're worried about this person. And this person's kind of losing it, and they want somebody in the department to know. And they're actually not even angry, or maybe the fear is like, we don't know what to do because we're concerned about this person. And that might be actually why they came. And if we don't first assess what the emotions are happening, we might completely miss that and assume that this is a conflict instead of what it says was a concern. And it might be something totally different. We go down this road. That was, I go, oh wow, what a useful strategy to slow us down and really assess what's happening.
And I like how there's this, there's kind of start out thinking, okay, here's the sort of breadth of different kinds of emotions. And then as we think about it a little bit more, oh, maybe there's some other emotions, maybe there's some other emotions even. And even having this discussion about like, oh, there's so many different things that a student could be feeling that are coming in with concerns. Already now in your toolbox, you have now I can ask students questions and get to a place of, what do I think that you're really feeling? What do you need right now? And you might even think, what are the students' goals? What if I don't know? What are your goals? Here, how can I help you get what you need and address the situation at the same time, and even involve them in the process? And that's another way to kind of get at those emotions as well. So that was good. That was a good scenario. All right. Did you all go through a scenario too, Nikki and John?
Yeah, the same one.
Oh, you did the student one too. Well, maybe we should. Let's. What else was?
I think everybody covered the things that we talked about.
Okay.
Kind of whole gamut too.
Okay. And so, did anybody think ahead to the conversation that they might have with the lecturer, if at all? That's totally fine.
We did.
It was okay. Yeah, I mean, it was not a part of the scenario. I was just wondering if anybody went there. So you did a little bit.
Yeah, and then we shared some examples, but then we talked about it's really based on the relationship you have with that particular faculty, lecturer or professor. So she was talking about, I mean, you can talk more about it, but she can be more direct, especially when you have this long-term relationship probably with the faculty, then you can just be really transparent and really share that. But then when you have a first-time lecturer, then I had to really approach it carefully because I didn't want to approach them just with the problem or concern. So I sort of started with the meal, like lunch and casual conversation to check in, and then slowly going into the area. So I think it works.
That's good, yeah, and I think that if you choose to engage this scenario with some of the other things that we're talking about, it might be useful to think about that and it might be even more relevant in some cases with some of the things we're talking about later. Not that the student part isn't going to be relevant to that too, but anyway, I was just curious, so that's
And
excellent.
I think the main idea that we came up with too is to approach the lecture in a way, with power in mind.
Yeah.
And how to de-escalate this and see it as a learning experience if possible for both parties involved.
Mhm.
So work with the students on one side, work with the faculty member on the other, have them come together in a way that isn't explosive and that's actually facilitative.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense too, and kind of recognizing that power differential will also, I think, come in handy later in this workshop, but also is super important because there's so many different things that are going on.
And if it was the lecture at all, it could have
Might
been
not
the
have.
department taking on, we did do a proper orientation, we didn't have the support services for.
We assigned a class they had no expertise in. Yeah, it was all different.
And I would say, it just makes me think about, I was writing scenarios, to go back to my own scenario and look at the words I used, and did I throw in assumptions into the scenario that I made, that I experienced, and went, wow, maybe I was already, the assumptions is what I need to.
Yeah. And there's all different awesome cognitive, psychological reasons why you would go back to, I've experienced this so many times before, and this is a pattern I recognize, so I'm going to jump into those assumptions. It's super easy. It's something that when you are really busy, you've got, a high-stress job, you're going to do that more often. Jump into those assumptions. So taking that step back, I think, is going to be really, really helpful, and having the space to do that with your colleagues is super helpful, because otherwise we will jump back into that.
Can I ask you a question about one of these questions, the last one, what have you done so far to help the situation? What role does that play in the emotion appraisal?
So when I ask somebody, so I get people coming in really stressful situations. One hypothetical situation in a staff, somebody's having a really tough time with their supervisor. They feel like the supervisor is being overly critical. They're starting to feel some learned helplessness, like they're not able to do their job, even though they used to be confident there. And one of the reasons that I might say, what are some of the things that you've done to try to help what's going on, is I want to know, did they feel comfortable talking to their supervisor? Did they talk to their supervisor? So what happened there? And that gives me an idea about what the power relationship is and what the comfort level is there. Is there fear there, or is there something else that's going on? I also might learn if they've said, I haven't done anything at all. Well, then I might want to know, is there something else that's going on in the office that's preventing them? Are there other people that are influencing that? And so it's a little bit of an investigative kind of thing, but thinking through what did somebody do to help their own situation. It's not a blaming kind of thing. It's not like, oh, you should have done X, Y, and Z. It's knowing what you did makes me understand how you're feeling in this situation a little bit more. So we also had a couple of pretty interesting different situations that went over here too, and I wonder if either of you would like to talk about the scenarios that you came up with. Yeah.
We talked about number 6, which is talking about faculty that have been around for a while, and those of us at the retreat, I mentioned this when we were there, so I just wanted to get everybody else's opinion and see if we could come up with the emotions surrounding a faculty member that isn't really performing well, and they've been around a while, and how do you try to deal with that? When we were at the retreat, everyone kind of came up with the idea of team teaching class as the best way to try to get that person to come around. And we were trying to identify the emotion. We were having a heck of a time with it. And Christine said, threatened. It's probably the way that person feels if you start talking to them about needing to change their teaching. And why is it that the students keep saying that you're absent? Because the faculty member says to me, I have no idea why they're totally in denial about these reports over the last 10 years. So it's like, why is that, and why is it, and how can we do something? So some comments about getting external reviewers from outside the department. It's just the concern of if they know they're coming, they're going to put on the best show they've ever put on in their lives, and so you'll never get really idea of what the students say every day. So.
Do we still do that, have the capacity to have someone come in and observe this from used to be from CTFD, instead of teacher, that you could ask someone to come in as part of.
That's a really great question. There's one for Amy Kilgard, actually, who's directing that this year. And I don't know, actually, if they're doing that kind of thing, or if they're doing more of a collective workshop kind of thing, or if both. But that's a good question.
I believe there's something like the waterman works in to do those patients for water classes. I'm not sure if that was the others.
All right, and so this was the senior faculty member that not really meeting the needs in terms of what the department thinks they're meeting, and is probably feeling threatened, and is probably feeling. And I think we also talked about that being a real ego kind of threat, that it wasn't like they felt they were threatened in losing their job or something, that it was really identity-based. And sometimes that can be really different than, sort of the professional.
And the other thing that came up, which I thought was really brilliant that you said, was the idea that if you've been teaching for a long time, the style of teaching has changed. So you also might be threatened with the fact that you're not understanding or up to date, and the new methodologies are something you don't know, and you're supposed to be doing them, and you also don't know that people around you will help you. But you wouldn't want to ask for help, because then it's going to show what you don't already know. And I wonder that with lecturers, and I learn, you kind of quickly go over it in faculty meeting, or you send stuff out, but people go, well, I mean, they don't want to say they don't know, or they don't, I don't know, it's just that kind of thing.
Just the way vulnerable.
Right.
Yes, and
Right.
I think that this is changing here, but I don't know this for sure, and I don't know if it, is different in different units, but we do performance evaluations that specifically have impact on a person's professional future at this institution. We don't do performance evaluations so that they can learn and grow. We say that, but that's not in effect what happens. And so, is it possible to set up situations where it's not an evaluation, it is more of a collaborative growth kind of exercise? Is there a way for us, in this institution to say, we do want to allow for growth, and maybe we can change some of our approaches to make that happen? And I don't know, actually, the answers to those questions, but I do know that divide means that people are going to feel more threatened always about being criticized. So, if you're criticizing me, that means that I'm not doing my job, and that means that, this and this and this are true about me, instead of, this is an opportunity for me to learn more about this area. And that's, it's a struggle for everybody, even if you are in one of these fail big kind of places, but yeah.
Well, you would think, when you talk about a full professor who has nothing to lose, right? When you go in and say, this is an opportunity, a real one, for the first time ever, right? Because at no point in your career is it just for the sake of providing support until you're at fault. But you've gone through the system, and it's so hardwired and ingrained in your neuro synapses that it's like you can't, it's where you feel like, where I imagine we feel like, I've achieved, I know, I've got some level of mastery, when what may be really happening, like it's almost this warped reality. And we create it, right? The system creates that. So it's when I'm empathic, I'm good. But it's hard to stay in that empathic place.
Yes.
Because there's other things that come in conflicts, and when students are really affected is when it reaches pinnacle point, a tipping point, and it just feels like
your empathic abilities are going all over the place, so you can hear from all sides. And I think that, there is that idea of a larger culture shift of, can we get people into this place where they feel like they can be supported and growing and helping? There's also a place where what you're doing right now is identifying, we're in a system that puts somebody in a place where it's completely rational and reasonable that they would be threatened and they would react this way. And so that identification of what's happening in the emotion means that you're probably not going to shift the culture this week, but that's a really awesome long-term goal that I hope actually all of us take on. But in the immediate future, how can I help you knowing that you're feeling this emotion and knowing that it's really reasonable that you're feeling it. So I think that's there are two, I think, positive takeaways from the analysis there. And then you all you solved one of them, but then you had but you also had a really interesting scenario you were.
That was number 5, so jump in when you one faculty member always makes caustic and sarcastic remarks. Now, we first thought about that, and that could be a type of humor. Yes. It could be. Bill Maher makes a living out of it. Very well. There are people who will just reflect their frustration through caustic and sarcastic remarks. The problem seems to be when it's aimed mostly at one person. That seems to be where the problem is, and this person might not know that the person is that person. So I think that probably the first thing would be to sit down with this person and maybe have another person present for being, let's say, Switzerland, in this situation where they may just be a neutral party, and we're going to have a discussion about people's sensitivities.
And we could definitely go there. I think that sort of like solution generation is, potentially a really a good one to do. Before you go there, what do you think is happening both with the person who's expressing the caustic humor emotionally and also with the person who's receiving it?
Well, Adriana said maybe that they've been seething about this person for years.
Well, we do have that happening.
They're free.
Completely possible. My guess is that this is a scenario that might fit across multiple
Yeah.
So there are different fun things that you can add to it.
Yeah, well, it's all over the place, but this person might be a long-standing frustration with this one person.
Okay.
So I think it might be best to identify what's the issue, and then the aiming and the targeting one person is not cool. And letting that person know that what the other one might be feeling. Now, of course, there is the possibility that this person really does think they're just being funny. So,
The President of the United States?
well, and then we brought in the cultural aspect. Go for it.
See, now I'm American, so I'm going to say that's getting away from the feeling part. No, it seems to me though that there could be this cultural aspect. I was sharing with them that I think one of the sarcasm is you're just born sarcastic. And I really had to learn that can be helpful. People were interpreting what I was doing as meaning, right? But I was reading this assuming that if that wasn't the case, that those kinds of remarks is driven by something. There's a feeling of either frustration or anger or irritation, just this I don't want to be here, I don't want to be around you, I don't like the way this is going. Just this, not explosive anger, but just that seething, that long seething irritation.
Yeah, it's almost like the perfect passive-aggressive response.
Passive-aggressive, yeah.
I'll just make funny remarks, and then I don't actually have to deal with the fact that I'm really having a problem with this person. Yeah.
For years.
For years.
For a decade.
We could be reading each other. I think when there's a one-time conflict, people often express that more directly, and it's just because of the indirect passive-aggressive thing, to me it felt more like a long-standing resentment of something or someone. And then other faculty members said they feel vulnerable and unsafe. Partly I'm taking out face value that they do feel like that they're being attacked or bullied or something, but I was also wondering if they're feeling embarrassed. That's, to be, and it's difficult in faculty meetings, right? If someone attacks you like that in a different environment, you may be able to stand up for yourself or argue or fight back in a different way. And faculty meetings are difficult, so I was thinking maybe they felt powerless too.
And I was just saying, we don't show our emotions very much. We do, but not vulnerable.
No.
Because we're reasonable people. Yeah.
Vulnerable.
And then there's the
who was attacked, you gotta check their sensitivity level. I remember once calling somebody a silly bunny, and they said, "Oh, call me name, just heard of you." Silly bunny. Silly bunny, okay. Sorry, silly bunny is a really bad name. And it was not anybody here,
But it's both true that sometimes what we say has an impact that we did not intend for it to have. And so being in a place where you can say, I didn't realize it had that impact. I'm gonna work and grow and try to not have that kind of conversation with you because I know that doesn't make you feel good. And I don't want to not make you feel good. So, but there's this idea of unsafe, and I will say that, there's a couple of capacities of my new job where I hear that unsafe all the time. I feel unsafe. And so many reasons that people might feel unsafe. I like your analysis that maybe this is, I'm feeling embarrassed. And so the sort of safety of my identity as an expert, my identity as a productive contributor here feels threatened. And if we can think about threat or fear as an emotional response and understand that people are coming back with the idea that I don't feel safe because they're having that kind of response, it's probably not in most cases that there's some kind of threat where I don't feel like I can go into that environment because physically something's going to happen. But people are very concerned about having their identity threatened. And if their identity might be threatened in a meeting, in a situation, in walking around campus, safety. That's a term that's going to come up for them, and it's going to indicate I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling threatened, and there could be a lot of different reasons why that's happening. So not to say, oh my gosh, you feel threatened, you feel unsafe, we have to keep you apart constantly. No, let's kind of dive down. And you all came up with a lot of different possibilities of what people could be feeling there. And now, next step, let's ask some questions and figure out, so knowing that you have a really broad palette of emotions that you can jump into gives you that opportunity to, and like we were talking about with the students too, to ask the questions, figure out what are your goals, what's going on here, and maybe having private conversations with each of them, getting down to it sounds like you might have some underlying frustrations with this person. Is that what's going on? Let's have a confidential conversation about that and see if we can work through it. I think that's super important. And then, there are a myriad of other possibilities that might extend into that. Yeah.
You also, thinking about the assessing the emotion part of that scenario, I wonder about the lack of safety. If one might find that part of the frustration is wanting other people in the meeting to, like interrupting microaggressions, to speak up. And if that might be part of why somebody might come forward.
They don't feel supported.
They don't feel supported.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's instead of just going to the between this person and this person, if thinking about the accountability thing, if there's some other places to consider that they might be doing also.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it kind of even extends that breadth of possible emotions. So hopefully that was helpful, kind of thinking through the emotions behind everything. I want to take a minute to acknowledge Alden. Hi, thanks for coming. And then also, we're going to go next to talking a little bit about power. So we started talking about emotions, underlying, and now kind of thinking through what does power and conflict have to do with one another? And in talking about power and conflict, I'm not going to give you a definition of power. I think that we all have different conversations about that, and that's important. But more importantly, I want us to recognize that power is going to have some kind of impact in a lot of different ways, depending upon who we're working with. And in some cases, it's going to seem flipped. So, and I know that I've had a lot of conversations with department chairs who, department chair, as I've said before, it's a weird position because you have power, right, in the service that you perform and in the leadership that you give to your department. But sometimes you might have faculty members that are engaging in a place where it seems like they're bringing something that is at a higher power level to a conflict with you. So I've talked to a lot of department chairs who feel like they're being bullied by faculty members, that there's some kind of, using some other kind of power techniques. In some cases, people feel even that from students. And so even though we have power in a relationship, sometimes the balance is not totally clear. And so there's a lot of ways that we can assess what's going on with the balance and how can we make that balance as equal as possible so that we can be collaborative in what we come up with. Also recognizing that sometimes there are situations where we can't be, and we'll talk about that too. So what I have here are thinking through, there's actually 4 different kinds. We talked, briefly of what kind of goals do you have, but there are really 4 different kinds of goals that people might have in any kind of conflict situation. And I'm going to read a few questions to you, and we're going to come back to these questions way at the end of the presentation. But the first, in terms of content goals, is to think from your point of view. So let's pretend you're in a conflict with somebody else. From your point of view, what would it look like to have successfully resolved this conflict, or at least be managing it as successfully as possible? What would that look like from the other party's point of view? And so if you can get yourself into that kind of questioning place. So I'm in a conflict with somebody, we both want to teach the same class, there's only one section of this class being offered. From my point of view, I get to teach the class. From their point of view, they get to teach the class. Not an easy one to resolve, but that, very simple kind of, that's what it might look like. But that's just a content goal. There are other goals here. So there are identity goals. And so thinking about that same situation, in effectively managing or resolving this conflict, who do I want to be recognized as internally or by others? What kind of identity do I want to have in this conflict? Not wider than this, just in this conflict, who do I want to be? Who does the other party want to be? Who do they want to be recognized as in this conflict? And this is kind of getting into some of those emotional assessments as well. So if I know that my faculty member needs to be recognized as an expert, as a longtime contributor to this university, as somebody who has given so many years of their life here, then I know that that's something important for them to be recognized as at the end of this conflict. Might not be meeting content goals, but we can still kind of get at those identity goals. Emotionally, in effectively managing or resolving this conflict, how do you most want to feel? And how do you think the other party wants to feel? Do I need to feel validated, or do I just need to feel okay? And depending upon how, the level of importance, the level of ego involvement, what I need to feel might be different. And then finally, in terms of power, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more specifically too. How can I best take action in this situation to reach my content, my identity, and my emotional goals? What's the best way that I can do that? And the flip question for the other party is, how can I support the other party in reaching their goals? Not how do they think the best action is, what do I need to do to help support them? So if we can identify all of these goals together, what do I think is the best way for me and how can I support them in meeting theirs, automatically sort of brings us into this collaborative place. And so thinking that in all of these places we have goals, and that the power goals are more about how we're situating meeting the other 3 are important. I also want to talk about, there's lots of different kinds of ways to interpret power styles, so please don't take this as, this is the way we interpret styles of power. This is one conception, and one that I think is useful in talking about how to manage conflict. But there are 3 different ways that I think we can kind of assess power styles in these areas. And as we're doing that, there's actually one of the handouts, I think, has some of these written on them. Yeah, the power strategy case study. So you can kind of see if there are actual strategies under each one of these. And so in thinking about the strategy of aggression, this is one that honestly I don't recommend as the go-to. Although I think what you're going to recognize in here is that we often go to this style, especially as administrators and department chairs. Threats are the delivery of punishment. If you don't teach this class effectively, you're not going to be able to teach it anymore. If you don't show up for office hours, I'm going to have a meeting with you and write up a memo of counseling and send it to the dean. We do that, and sometimes we have to do it. I'm not saying that we don't have to do it, but last resort. So threats or delivery of punishment is definitely something that sometimes feels like our first resort because it's the easiest one. Physical intimidation or attacks, I seriously hope that none of you are doing that. I won't say it hasn't happened. I'm just going to say that let's hope it's not here. However, name calling or other kinds of emotional or sort of, kind of attacking the identity, intimidation, that does happen. That does happen. You're just too sensitive. And I'm calling that out because, I recognize that, sometimes we think we say something, it's like, oh, they shouldn't have taken it that way. And sometimes people really are super sensitive. But I've literally heard people say, you're too sensitive. Toughen up, get it together. And that is part of our culture, right? We expect people to be able to take criticism. We expect people to be able to just kind of deal with it. And, I kind of do that with my kids too, to be honest. So toughen up. You can't just cry over everything. It's important to them, and in some cases the reason that people are sensitive are because of their past experiences. We don't even know what those are, how they're contributing, or what's going on. And so without knowing that, the more that we can sort of, even making that sort of public assessment or even interpersonal assessment is something that we can refrain from doing. I really also hope you're not lying, cheating, or manipulating. You might feel like other people are though. And I've definitely heard people come to me and say, I think they're lying about this, or I think they're trying to manipulate in doing this. And in those situations, it's really tough to manage. And then also trying to use that sort of power over is something that discouraged. Now, why did I go through all of those things? Again, not because I don't think that you should do them, but because sometimes those feel like defaults. And I'm framing them as the don't do this kind of thing right now, but it's what we grow up with. I'm not going to say that I haven't used any of those in the past. I certainly have. I've been encouraged to use some of those things in the past. And like I just admitted, I do use those things in my family sometimes. And yet, kind of coming back to that idea, like, wait a minute, that's aggressive. And if I'm in a conflict situation and I want this to really be a place where we can grow and we can kind of come out of that culture, this is a place where I can see my own growth, and I think that it's possible for growth to happen in other places as well. But kind of moving into this idea of assertion and integration. These are also two different kinds of power styles, and they're styles that can be really, really powerful. For instance, being assertive in a situation, in some cases might be a little bit too much, but I'm going to be the one to initiate this conversation. I noticed that you've been making really caustic remarks in faculty meetings, and you might not realize that that's hurting somebody else, but it does seem to be hurting and being targeted at somebody else. So maybe let's sit down, let's have a conversation about what's going on with this. I'd love to hear your perspective. And being the person who initiates that conversation is incredibly assertive, and also, I'll just say, really uncomfortable for some people. A lot of people are hardwired to avoid conflict. We talked about that the last time. But being assertive is one way to say, I'm going to use my power in this situation. I'm going to initiate that conversation. But in addition to initiating conversations, you can also regulate conversations. And that's something that you can do in faculty meetings, right? Or at a classroom. You get to regulate the conversation. We're going to have a speakers list. And I only want you to speak when you come up on the speakers list. If you're jumping in and jumping out, that's not part of our agreed upon system of communication. Or I want everybody to respond to the questions that I have in this email, and I'm going to compile that and put it out as, what do we think? This is also a way of sort of using a power strategy, and using that assertive power strategy not to, manipulate, but to say there might be things that come up here that maybe not everybody wants to hear. Maybe it's tough for everybody to hear, but you can hear it all and digest it and put it out in a more neutral fashion. It's something that I often do in mediations. When I meet with parties ahead of time, they sometimes don't say things that are really nice about the other parties. And so I get that, you're really angry, there are things going on, and have this, especially with faculty, like they're incompetent, they're not doing their job, I'm picking up after them all the time, I'm constantly having to, do all of this work, and they're just slacking off, and that's not something that I'd like in a public email. But what I do think is important that's coming out of that conversation is that there is at least one person who feels like their workload is higher than they can manage, and they also don't feel supported that their other faculty members are bringing the level of workload that they are. They might be wrong about that, but I know that workload's an important discussion, so we can have a really neutral discussion about that. So that's one advantage of regulating that conversation. You can try to persuade, and this comes down to, in my mind, offering reasons for decisions. So I'm not just saying this is the schedule because I'm the chair and I get to say that this is the schedule. And you all might not do that, but there definitely are some departments on campus that the schedule goes out, that's what you're teaching, and that's it. The chair just does it. So there's different cultures. Maybe let's talk about the curriculum that we need to offer. Let's talk about how many classes our students need, what seats do we need to offer. Let's do that collaboratively. Or let me offer this schedule and tell you I really need you to teach these classes because this need needs to be met. These people are teaching over here, and this need, and just giving reasons. So the idea that you're sort of persuading to bring what some people call buy-in, getting everybody to buy into what that decision is. As department chairs and other leaders, you are often asserting your leadership. And so in asserting leadership, basically what you're doing is making sure that the communication that you give is actually impactful of everybody in the room. So I'm not just going to have this conversation with you while everybody else sits around and listens to us. We're going to talk about what's actually happening with everybody so that my communication is relevant to everybody. Using your own expressiveness is assertive in that you can demonstrate your own emotions and express your own emotions. Showing a little bit of vulnerability sometimes actually elicits a little bit more sort of buy into a conversation in that facilitation. So even eliciting or even expressing your own emotions, like I'm feeling really scared about our ability to be able to offer the curriculum that we're supposed to be offering to our students. I'm not sure how we're going to accomplish that with, this schedule or with these resources. I need your help in figuring out what do we need to do? How can we redistribute classes? How can we think about what we're offering? So in some ways, there's that I'm going to express my own emotions. Displaying politeness is more just kind of modeling my respect for everybody in the audience, and then forming a coalition, something that frankly I'm not very comfortable with, but I know a lot of people actually use it really well. So the idea that bringing a bunch of people together that I know we're all going to take the same stance and we're going to support each other in this stance, and we're going to bring this to the conflict or to the group. And I know that a lot of people use that pretty well. So it can be used in ways that I think are really supportive, that are really helpful. I always feel a little bit weird and manipulative doing it, but I think that other people actually do it pretty well. So it's not something that I am good at myself. So I can't give you as much advice on how to do that, but I do know that people do it well. And so those are some of the strategies that we think of as asserting. Some of them really great. Some of them maybe feel good to you. Some of them maybe don't. And assertion is also this place where aggression is a power style where I am in power and I am telling you how I am in power. Assertive is, my my power is up for negotiation, but I still have it. I still have power in this relationship. We can talk about that power, but that's where it is. Integration is more, well, let's share the power. I don't need the power. Let's resolve this. Our interests are in the outcomes, not the power in this relationship right now. So now, if I go to integration, then the kinds of strategies that I'm using are a little bit different. I'm describing a situation. I'm coming to the faculty saying, okay, everybody, these are the resources that we have to work with. These are the classes that, at least it's my understanding that we need. Let's talk about it. What do you think? Let's make this decision together. It takes a lot longer that way. But, I'm describing the situation. I am opening it up for discussion. Disclosure. Disclosing your feelings. Disclosing your failures. Sometimes disclosing your failures is the thing that makes it more comfortable for other people to say, oh, okay, I'm going to take that criticism better. I'm going to take that constructively because the person that is leading the situation is willing to do that as well. Soliciting disclosure. Tell me about times when you felt really good doing this. Tell me about things that haven't been working out for you very well. Asking people for the stories that they have. Giving supportive remarks, and this is where, remember I said that service of validation was going to come back up. This is where it comes back up. Using integrative strategies of power management. How can I give supportive communication? How can I validate people for the work that they're doing? This is the place where I can kind of bring people into the conversation. Making concessions. So sometimes you might really believe something, but actually as the conversation goes on, you think, it seems more important to everybody else that we do it this way. Okay. And being public about it. I'll make that concession. Accepting responsibility. Department chairs need to do that all the time. Sometimes more than is reasonable. Deans need to do it all the time, sometimes more than is reasonable. But that idea that somebody's got to be responsible for these decisions. Sure, we all contributed to it, but I'm going to accept this responsibility. It's a way of asserting leadership. I'm taking the responsibility. Thank you for your contributions, but you don't have to worry about sort of the back end of that. And then also establishing common ground and reminding everybody about where our common ground is. So here are all of the things that we agree on. And doing that in a meeting, doing that in even just a interpersonal conversation. Hey, I know that we agree on X, Y, and Z. And we're still working on these other things, but at least we've got that. That's a way for you to kind of manage I've got power in the situation and I'm giving it to you too. Let's work together. And so it's empowering everybody. I know these all sound familiar to you because I'm sure all of you have used every single one of them at different times, except for maybe some of the physical threat stuff we talked about in the beginning. You're getting ready. Questions about sort of these different strategies and sort of why they fit into the areas that I'm identifying. So I really want to be clear here. I don't think that you shouldn't use, other than the physical intimidation, I don't think that we shouldn't use any of these strategies. But what I would like to do in this next activity is to be thinking about when are these strategies going to be most successful for us? So if our goal is managing a conflict or resolving a conflict or even just helping people feel better, what strategies can we use that are going to be the best ways to do that? And sometimes those are not going to be the most comfortable ways, especially if being publicly disclosive isn't your strong suit. It might not be. That might be something that you want to work up to or before feeling better about it. But which of these are going to be helpful? And so in the scenarios, and you can keep the same scenario you were working on, or you can work on a different scenario. It kind of depends upon whether or not you think you've exhausted things. There are three parts of, and let me make sure that, that's the next thing, power listening. Three things that I want you to try to do, and one is, you've already started to identify goals for the parties in conflict, unless you're going to pick a new scenario. You can pick a new scenario and identify new goals. But if you've already kind of thought of those emotions, you might already have the goals. The second thing is, what types of power strategies are currently being used in the conflict? So I know that these are all hypothetical scenarios, but if you had a situation like this in the past, or you're having a situation that seems kind of like it, what are the ways that people are communicating now? And try to think through what's happening. And then third, what do you think you would change to move toward an integrative strategy? And that does not mean that you need to get to an integrative strategy. Perhaps you are all in the aggressive place right now. And that is reasonable. I have certainly been in that place where we haven't done anything except for try to threaten this person to get them to do this because they're not listening to anything else. So if I'm here, if I'm really just maybe like, we're in the progressive discipline place and that's where we're hanging out, what can I do to move toward integration? And that might be kind of making it into the assertion area. And could that be helpful? And I think that part of this conversation is not, how do we move over there, because that is the right thing to do, but what could be helpful about that? Or isn't it helpful? And so those are the kinds of insights that I think we're hoping to get through this. It's not the answer is to move this way, but in thinking about moving this way, what potentially works, what potentially doesn't work? What would be some of the roadblocks, the things that would stop you from moving that direction? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, we're going to work on scenarios then really need to keep track of time. Yes. Oh, we're totally on time. So yeah, we're at 10:35, so we have plenty of time. So let's work through this for a little bit, and I'm going to stop and hang out. So I noticed that some of the groups actually took different scenarios, and some of the groups are still working on the same scenarios. Some of you might have just made up a new one, which would also be great. And I also saw a lot of variety in kind of where we thought it was appropriate to be addressing different situations, and maybe some nuances that, depending upon your department, there might be other kinds of situations as well, and reasons why you might get different categories. So Connie, since you're all by yourself, how many of you chose a different scenario? I'm just curious which groups. So a couple of groups chose a different scenario. So I won't forget. Which scenario did you take this time?
Well, we decided that we were really going to challenge ourselves. And we took number 7.
Okay.
We were trying to figure out, how could we get more of our faculty to buy in or to take
So this is the faculty are all tenured in, and they don't want to have anything to do with teaching these courses that are not in their interest. Yeah. So what did you think through? So I mean, that's a situation where you didn't already identify the goals. Did you come up with what kind of goals everybody had, and then where did you see yourselves on the strategies to use?
We thought about, this had to do with the service work, the service piece for the department.
Okay.
And so we did look at the goals that the chair might have in trying to get different tasks accomplished, getting people to sit on the committees, and then also looking at what faculty might get out of serving on different committees, et cetera. I know Yolanda brought up an interesting issue that we didn't get to discuss a whole lot, as to whether it's a workload issue or a morale issue, which I think is really a good point that, some people, the department might be, having certain issues, and so they don't feel good about participating. But in other cases, faculty might really be willing to participate because a committee fits in with their particular interests. So they have a goal in terms of research or whatever, teaching, improving their teaching to sit on a certain committee. We also thought about sort of the strategies that might help, and it seemed like we've had some good examples of things that have taken place in departments that show an integrative approach. where a change in leadership has helped and faculty feel more empowered to express kind of their positions, their voices, and so there's some changes that happen.
That makes a lot of sense, and I do think it's interesting to think about what are the motivations of faculty to not want to participate in service work. Is it a workload issue? I don't have enough time to do this. If I participate in service work, I am unable to do this, this, and this. Or is it, I don't feel good about participating on this committee with these people. I don't get along with those people. We don't work well together. Maybe there's something in the, that's more of an emotional self-preservation, in which case it's a whole different kind of goal and a different kind of conversation in terms of persuading them to work or to do service. And also potentially some different solutions. Is that the only way the committee can be comprised? Is that the only kind of service that they can do? And so really getting down to what's the motivation for the refusal. And there might be other things too. I'm tired, I'd much rather spend my time, lots of different kinds of things. But then I also think it's interesting to think about the change of, when you said change of leadership, I'm also thinking just sort of like a recentering or a reorganization of a particular group can also have that impact, where if you had a leader in the past who was using a certain kind of style or using strategies from a particular kind of style, that might have put everybody in a particular mindset to only respond to those kinds of strategies. Whereas if things are shifted up, the responses might change. And I also think it's a good lesson that if we wanted to change up some of our own styles, there might be some positive reaction to that too. So it's kind of interesting to think about what's happened in departments and is there room for growth? Is there room for moving into these places? So that's good. Now you all used a different scenario too, which...
Well, it was almost like this one, but a different, we did come up with a different one, but it was the flip side of someone that had longevity. It's for new faculty that are coming in and workload issues.
Okay.
And disparity with what workload is required in Department A, Department B, or Department C.
Mm-hmm.
And not feeling that they are overworked or...
So faculty from one department is looking at what their service assignment is and saying that faculty member in the other department doesn't have anything close to what I'm doing. It's not fair. Okay.
Right.
So what did you work through in helping to deal with that?
We told them with each area that with aggression, what we would say is, well, you can leave. Yeah, so we could handle it that way.
It is a possibility.
And then with reception in a department meeting, having individual meetings with this person and having conversations with them, and initiating conversation and trying to get an understanding of it may not be the service, it may be something else. I mean, we may be focusing on that, but it could be something else. That could be it. And then in integration, having how you therefore could say, well, this is part of your commitment, but what would you like to do instead of this? What is it that would work?
Yeah.
Is that?
That makes some sense. And in a lot of ways, that new faculty member that comes in on a tenure track, there are pretty easy assessments. These might not be the correct assessments, but understanding, that person's probably nervous about their process through RTP. That person is still navigating and understanding how things at the university work. And so knowing that those are probably going to be the appraisals that the person is making almost make it easier to go to assertive or integrative strategies, because you can, say, this is probably, I'm hearing that these are probably your concerns. Are there other concerns there? And then inviting that conversation, sort of inviting them to disclose what's going on, what's the concern might be really helpful. So, good. And you all had a pretty in-depth conversation as well in the same scenario. So.
Same scenario as much as we were looking at different ways of handling difficult issues
Yeah.
that come to the desk. And I was talking about my leadership group where difficult issues, I asked my 4 other people on my group, because I might be missing something, they might be able to add, they might be able to interpret it in a different way than I'm interpreting. And sometimes we even come to a vote as to how to deal with something, which, because some of us go down a more rigid side and some more open. So, that's why I have an odd number, so that we can actually come to a vote on which way we should do it. And I ultimately am it, but the input is appreciated. And then I have acknowledgement of a difficult situation, and I have a whole bunch of different ideas. And I might have more information about the situation that could be behind, like number 5, that person is maybe sealing. And I haven't seen that because I am, with 2 bodyguards behind the desk, and they're in the hall with this person all the time. And
Right, other people might have observed different kinds of interactions, yeah. And it sounded like the rest of you had maybe some kind of leadership team dynamic as well, or?
We do.
Yeah, okay. Same kind of thing, sort of consultative,
Yeah.
all right, that juicy in-depth analysis will wait till later.
I don't have bodyguards. And a lot of people have marginalized identities, and so when you try to talk about specific things, it seems like people get really personal coming from their different identities.
And yeah, and so I'll just bring up, because some others might have had this kind of situation too. It almost sounded like some folks in the department might feel like they can make an assessment of other people's identities and maybe make some assumptions about what they can do and why they can do that. And I think that whenever you have folks sort of making that like, well, you have this kind of identity and that means X, Y, and Z about you, that's super uncomfortable, trying to make people kind of go back into that, speak from your own experience. Your own experience is definitely valuable, but you don't really get to speak from other people's experiences. They have valuable experiences as well, kind of moving back into that part of the facilitation. It doesn't relate specifically to the power styles and strategies that you might use, but trying to place people into an opportunity where they can communicate with each other. Or we also talk about the possibility that in some cases we might need to move back to that aggressive place. And there might be something going on that's not potentially in your department, but there might be something going on that actually that person needs to be held accountable for behaviors that they're expressing. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think brings in another layer to the conversation, an important layer around power. And I think especially in this college that is explicitly grounded in social justice and issues of equity, and then what does that mean in each of our programs, and what are we teaching our students in terms of how to practice equity and how to practice being a part of spaces that are moving toward greater equity and social justice. And so then what does that mean to be existing in an institution that is by definition so hierarchical? And I know in our department we're constantly, it feels like this is just really part of a hard practice. What does it mean in terms of our processes in our department to be, sort of thinking about how to share power and how to do things and in more progressive to possibly radical ways within the context of all of the systems that that require compliance and to use a term that we're now using regularly. And that's a thing. And so thinking about that in the context of these conflicts and where one asserts power and what kind of power and how to do that, while also being consistent with, walking our talk of what we're teaching and what we're trying to move towards, so that we're not replicating the same power imbalances that we're saying are so awful for people's health. And so how to build all of that in here, I think, is another layer. And the thing I appreciate about the integration, we sometimes talk about ladders of participation and that sort of thing, when we talk about community engagement. What does real participation mean? Thinking about, I don't know, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's easy. And particularly in issues of conflict, because I think you're right. We can easily go to aggression.
It probably is the easiest way,
right?
To manage everything, keep it in mind.
Right, and you've got 4 other things to do, and you don't want to spend as much time on this issue today. And and I'm learning this just dealing with just a little part of student issues. I mean, they eat up so many hours of time just for one thing that keeps going on. So anyway, it's an interesting thing to bring up.
Well, and also the best part about talking about these issues now and thinking about moving in these strategies is that, yes, it's going to take a lot of time, but as you continue to do it, it takes less and less time. So people kind of move into learning how to practice it, being more comfortable with that practice. Although I completely understand that sometimes we do need to go back to that, nope, this is the way it is, you have acted inappropriately, this is how we, kind of go up the chain. I also recognize that if we keep doing that without trying everything else first, then that ends up being, again, a part of our plan. It's exactly the thing we were talking about before. If I fail, I'm going to be held to the sanction, and so I don't feel comfortable talking about my weaknesses. I don't feel comfortable trying to grow as a professional in this particular community, because admitting that I didn't do something right means, this other thing. And so part of that, thought about what are we doing here as a community and kind of moving more toward that integrative approach, that acceptance of, we made a mistake, or this isn't actually working out very well. I know you've been doing this for a really long time, but we've kind of gotten to a place where this generation of students isn't responding to it. What can we do to help you change, help you grow there? Those actually are really great opportunities, but also very challenging to take on.
And recognizing that unconscious biases, with whom we might go to the aggressive place first, and with other people we might go to the integrative place first.
For sure.
And being really self-reflective in that space too.
And honestly, we're going to go to that aggressive place when we feel threatened, right? So, yeah. I feel threatened by that person. I feel like that I'm vulnerable all of a sudden. I'm going to assert my power. I'm going to, make sure that you understand, where I am. And I'm not saying that all of you do that, but that is it's almost like a gut reaction for some folks. And so it's good to recognize, like, what kind of biases, do I have a relationship with this person where actually I do feel threatened by them, even if they, they might not hold the professional powers. There's some other kind of power in this relationship that I'm interpreting or that I'm feeling, and how can I recognize that and think about my emotions around it too. All right, we didn't we talked about yours, we kind of talked about yours, Which was, did you guys do a scenario back there too? Did you stick with that?
We got one right back for you.
Oh, good. Do we have a new one? Yeah.
So, hardcore personnel issue. I'm not sure that I might have to kill you. Oh, that's a very aggressive.
You will have to. Sometimes we have to rely on that.
We've tried killing it. It didn't work. So thank you for this job.
We have some more options now. Yeah.
So we were wrestling with number 3.
Okay. I remember this one.
And it's about a senior person struggling around there teaching. And it was funny, it's like, we're thinking, okay, what if you tried this? You tried disclosures, you tried to empathize and be supportive and try to understand it through their frame of mind and try to connect in that way. But what it's taken by, and a lot of this might have to do with the fact of senior/privilege, right? Is that all your supportive remarks, all attempts at disclosure is just taken as an affirmation of that person's point of view, right? And that's how they use the power. And so they get more entrenched, and basically the message that you get is really one of, I'm a great teacher. Well, that data is wrong, or that I'm rigorous, or students have changed and they're not up to snuff. Students are misunderstanding me. I'm a great teacher. And all your qualitative stuff, well, that's selectively choosing things. So, with that kind of an attitude, right, especially since if you haven't been doing these things for a long time, there's no norm or feedback. It's just kind of hitting them, and what you get is a wall of just outright denial and affirmation of their identity. So, we were kind of really wrestling.
Yeah. So what do you, suggestions about how that might be dealt with? What kind of action plans should be put into effect in order to bring some resolution to that?
Yeah. And obviously, sort of a case-by-case thing. We were actually wrestling in this group with the same scenario a little earlier, where I don't remember if it was the same scenario, but something similar, where there's a lot that's kind of going on with that faculty member that feels threatening for them, right? And so what I'm hearing from you is, all right, we're recognizing that they feel threatened. We're trying to do, the validation of where they're coming from. They're hearing that, and then they're not hearing the constructive criticism that sort of also happens. And that is really frustrating. And I think that at some point there does have to kind of come to, if you really believe that you've tried everything and it's not happening, are there choices that can be offered? And one of the things we talked about in this group, it's a matter of resources, not appropriate in all cases. Is there support that we can give, like a TA or something like that, an assistant that can kind of help with scaffolding? Maybe you're right. Maybe students don't have the same kind of background that they did back in your day, and maybe that does mean that this material is too challenging for them. So how can we make it so it's not so frustrating for you to teach them? Is there a way that we can help, have somebody support you or somebody support the students in that scaffolding? So these are possible creative solutions. Also understanding there might be somebody who's just ready to dig their heels in because they're just about to retire, and I'm not going to listen to anybody in a power position. And then there might be that going back to the aggressive strategy.
So what's challenging, I think, in these situations is that, I love your idea around the notion of having a TA or thinking about support mechanisms.
Yeah, and I know it's not always possible. So.
Right. Well, actually, I think a lot of those things are possible. So I think support mechanisms, coaches, TAs, consultants, and stuff like that. Where I think we are stuck is all of those things presumes that there's a shared acknowledgement that a problem exists. I'll take the TA because I have a problem and I want to solve it. So there's an awareness piece and there's a motivational piece. Where I'm stuck is what if you're lacking all of them? There's not an awareness, and hence obviously there's no motivation. So there's no problem here. Well, you can spend the money on a TA, but don't really know why you need one. And that's the piece where almost, personally, I have to put on my clinician's hat and figure out how do you bring somebody to it, right? And that's a tricky thing. And so I put that out there just for people's consideration.
There is a method okay, so you would have to deal with this sensitively, although I love this method for classroom assessment. Has anybody done the small group assessment in classrooms? So there's it's the small group, SGI ID, and I can't remember what the ID stand for, but it's a small group instructional something or other. I do know that Dr. Kilgard in the CETL has done this in the past, and I've used it in the past, and it's an opportunity to have somebody kind of go into a classroom without the professor present and have more of a qualitative discussion with students about what's going well for them in the classroom and what's not going well for them and what they need. I offer that as something that I think is valuable for everybody to do anyway, and that if we're offered to select a professor, you can't do all of the classes every semester because it's really labor intensive, but if you did a few of them every semester and this professor were in one of those classes, it'd be interesting to see after such an in-depth analysis of the class whether or not they were still able to say, there's no problem.
Do you have an outside facilitator coming to do that? Because I do those in my classes regularly.
Yeah, so you might do that. You might do that as a, okay, guys, how's it going here, and how's, but for a real, assessment for it to, I think, have weight for the students and for the students to feel like they can really express anonymously to, obviously, a certain extent, what they're feeling, having an outside facilitator come in. And so the way that I used to do it at San Jose State is that my colleagues and I would switch classes for a day. So I'd go in and I'd do one colleague's class and they would come in and do my class, and then we would do the report for each other. So, it was work, but it was something that we could give to each other and it was valuable.
That's real cool.
Okay,
That's real peers.
It is. You can also bring somebody else. You can bring somebody else in. Like if you don't have that kind of peer support, you don't have the expertise in your faculty to do it, which is possible. You can bring somebody else in. You could bring Dr. Kilgard in to talk about how to administer it so that your faculty, so that you can train your faculty to have that kind of expertise. It's labor intensive and it's time intensive, and I know that sometimes we're packing our classes so full with stuff it doesn't feel like we can add in another level of assessment. But if it's something that you're interested in and asking me to plan for the semester, and I'm not saying that is the answer, it's one thing that I might think, I'm not sure that you can, respond by saying that doesn't exist now, because there's a lot of data there. So, and you might find out if it even does exist.
Well, I really like that because it sort of fits into the things we're thinking about, which is when you're dealing with the personality and the identity and the entrenchment, then maybe the other option is really grounding yourself in the data.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's the data from the students, and your methodology actually just gives more license for that to come to life in a more powerful way.
It's definitely kind of going really into the details of it's also really valuable. So some of you might actually think, I would like to do that in my class, whether or not I'm having a problem. It's a valuable tool. So.
Yeah, I'm there. Are we setting up meetings with certain chairs in here?
Right, and I want to, okay, so it's 11:30. And then we didn't hear from you guys. Stop using guys, I'm sorry about that.
We did 6 again, and Marty had to take me down because I was fine. I don't have time as chair, so I went the aggressive route with both the students. I said, what, tough enough. Life isn't fair. When you go out in the real world, things are going to be disorganized. So,
strategy might work.
yeah. And then with the faculty, I said, you either get organized or leave. So, and Marty said, Eric, maybe move towards the middle of the So then we said, all right, let's initiate a conversation. So bring him into the room. And then I would be there to regulate so that there isn't blame going on. So that we move towards the assertive, whereas Marty was already starting at the assertive point and going to more integrated. But we did have an issue, and I thought, that's why it was really important to go back to your last question. What have you done so far to help the situation? The first inclination was say, the faculty has office hours, the door's open, they're very responsive, they talk to students, we're here for students, go to their office hours and figure it out. And maybe we're intimidated, we don't know what they're, and if we found that emotion to be true, then we have to go from integration back to assertion and at least get the conversation going. And then once the conversation is going, you know, I don't know if this is manipulative, but we're talking about accepting responsibility, saying, you know what, as a department, we played a role in this disorganizing. We didn't give an I-Learn enough time for the lecturers to get accommodated with that. And that role modeling might open up their thinking, but I don't know.
I don't think it's so I think there's, it's sometimes very difficult for folks to separate I'm communicating strategically versus I'm manipulating. I do think that, but I think it's actually an important question to ask, and I'm glad that you asked it, because I think there's a lot of folks who be like, you know, what are you doing? You're trying to manipulate me to feel this way or think this way, and that's not really what's happening when we're choosing appropriate communication strategies. That's strategy for how we want the communication to happen, not for what we want people to say. And I think that manipulation is literally, you know, changing what people think, not giving them the opportunity to think through something differently. So lying and cheating are excellent examples of manipulation. I'm going to tell you a lie because I want you to think something differently than what you think, and that's what I'm doing to make you believe this. But offering you the opportunity to think in a different way or explore something differently or showing you something that I can do and giving you the opportunity to act that way, not manipulation. That is strategy. And usually it is not taken as manipulation either. So my expression of vulnerability is not insincere. And I think that's, you know, if you were lying about the fact that the department, you know, sometimes gives lecturers I-Learn sites too late for them to develop it, that's one thing, but I bet you're not, because I've been in your situation and I know that when you're hiring people last minute, they don't have a lot of time to do this. And so that's not insincere, but it is offering you know, it's okay for us to admit mistakes, and I'm going to admit one to you and give you the opportunity to feel okay about admitting it to me. So that I think is actually a really legitimate and potentially really productive way of moving forward. So how did that work? Were the strategies helpful, or you know, were there questions about it? Did you get to a point where you're like, I don't know what she means here, or what this... So I think that the thing to keep in mind again is this is not some kind of the way the world works. This is just a grouping of strategies in a way that I think might be helpful in thinking about them. So if it's helpful to think about them in this way and to think about the different kinds of strategies and tools that you have at your disposal, that's perfect. But it's not that we always need to be moving toward an integrative solution. And again, sometimes there are reasons why we kind of want to backtrack. So that's what I'm all right. We're only going to do a little tiny bit more. And part of this is to talk about how we can use those assessments of emotion, and also maybe let me know when I should take a break for folks to get lunch too. But we're good. How do we use these sorts of communication strategies to move forward when we've made those assessments of emotion and of power. And so the power style strategies and the communication strategies that are sort of in those columns are good, but this is sort of the overall, here are things that we can do in every single conflict situation, and they're going to change up a little bit depending on what our assessments are. And so I'm bringing you the 3 C's, and I can't really take credit for these particular 3 C's, nor do I think that this is based in a particular theory, other than I think that these are ways that folks often think about conflict management. And that is that in doing each of these things, we might be able to lead more toward resolution. So the first part is that, and this is the hard part, and I think we were talking about this in one group, which is confronting somebody about a conflict is really difficult, but it is always a thing that needs to happen. So in all situations of conflict, if the conflict hasn't been confronted, you need to do that. And so I think we talked about that in a number of different ways. We're assessing emotions to see what are the ways that people are going to be most comfortable hearing about that conflict. We're trying to find out, what are the goals that people might have and helping them understand what do they want out of a resolution for this conflict. But we have to actually talk about what it is in the first place. One of the things that I'm often finding now is that folks will come to me because they're upset about something, but they don't realize that they are in a conflict and that they need to actually confront that conflict. So they come in, they're upset, I'm not getting along with my boss, he's being really mean to me, and so I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? What are your goals? It sounds like you need to have a conversation with your boss. Have you tried that yet? And this is kind of back into what have you tried to do to help resolve that situation? No, I'm feeling really intimidated. Oh, okay, well, what are the things that are making you feel intimidated? What kinds of support systems do you have? Part of my role is that I can always offer to go in with somebody if they're feeling intimidated. I can sit with somebody else as they make that confrontation. But either way, it's got to come out. And when it doesn't come out, then you might have the passive-aggressive, sarcastic, caustic remarks that happen in faculty meetings, or you might have I'm not going to do that service work because I've gotten all this kind of crap for the last 30 years, and nobody's paying any attention to that. I'm not going to get anything from that either. So if we're not actually confronting it, it sort of leads to maybe a continuance of the conflict. So confrontation has to happen. Lots of different strategies on how to do that we talked about. Confirmation is kind of getting back to that idea about affirmation and validation and using that to confirm the emotions that people are feeling, the goals that they have, and the needs that they have in that conflict. So confirmation is not, yes, I agree that there is a conflict. It's, I'm confirming who you are and how you are in this conflict, making sure that you're sort of making those different recognitions. And then comprehension is helping everybody who's involved in a conflict to actually understand the perspectives of the other. And this is something that I think also becomes really difficult, which is I'm thinking about what are Connie's concerns during this conflict. I'm thinking, okay, so emotionally I think she probably feels this way. I think she probably has these kinds of goals. And I think that Eric is feeling a slightly different way and he has these kinds of goals. Let's bring them together so that they can hear the perspectives of each other. Not so that they can argue about how to go forward, but let's just hear what's going on here. And sometimes that's going to lead to a resolution, and sometimes that's going to lead to, and now I'm even more frustrated, and I have to leave and I have to think about it for a while. But it does lead to comprehension, it leads to understanding. And inevitably, even if that increases frustration for a little bit, actually in the long run, it does usually lead to some kind of resolution. And so now what I want to do is, and we can kind of do this this is going to take a little bit longer, which is why it's good that we're kind of doing this during lunch. I want to go back to those questions that I asked you at the beginning, and so I apologize for how much text is on this slide. But this gets back to the 4 different goals, and the 4 different goals, if you'll remember, I think I have it now, it's like the content goal, the identity goal, the emotional goal, and the goals related to power, who you want to be. So thinking about a conflict that you're involved in, and if you want to sort of hypothetically put yourself into one of these scenarios, that might be helpful. What does it look like for you to have successfully resolved or managed the conflict? What does that look like? What does the outcome look like to you? What does it look like from the perspective of the other person or the other party? Sometimes there's more than just one other person. Who do you want to be recognized as internally by others? So this is getting at that identity goal. Who are you at effectively managing or resolving this conflict? Do I want to be seen as somebody who has a lot of power and can make sure that you behave in the way that you need to? For some people, that is really important to them. Do I want to be the person who people trust, come to when they need support? Do I want to be seen as competent? Do I want to be seen as, there are lots of different ways that you might want to be seen. So who do you want to be seen as and who do they want to be recognized as? And this is also getting back to, I think, Alvin, you came in after we had the initial discussion about the faculty member, because there's one in like every department, right? They've been around for a long time, struggling with something, who do they need to be recognized at the end of this? You know, what's important for them? And when this does get resolved, because I'm confident it will get resolved, what's going to be important for them to be seeing themselves as? How do you want to feel in resolving or managing this conflict? And I think this is important in a lot of ways. Do you need to feel validated and supported? So sometimes, you know, I've been putting on the, oh yeah, chairs need to validate and support, you know, other people when they're involved in conflicts. Sometimes that's really important for chairs too. Is that important to you? And if so, how can we kind of facilitate that happening? How can we make sure that this goes both ways? And then, what do you think is the best way to take action? And I left these questions to the end, although I recognize that folks were kind of going here with the scenarios as we were talking about them, which makes a lot of sense, because, you know, in some ways you're thinking, how am I going to resolve this? Oh yeah, if I interpret it this way, I might resolve it this. If I interpret it this way, I might resolve it that way. Well, now's a chance to sort of think through, get that scenario and say, okay, in this scenario, here's how I'm defining it. Here's what I think are their goals. Here's where I think the emotional states are. Here's the power strategy that I think is most appropriate because of these different things. And then these are how I want this to come out. This is what the outcome looks like. And so we'll take the sort of final bit of the workshop to work through that and then talk about what you came up with for solutions. If you think that you're going to be rehashing things too much, I do encourage you to pick a different scenario so that I can kind of go through the whole process.